Hi everyone, this is Dee Dee sharing another encounter with you from the internet. This one's a little long, so I invite everyone to pull up a stump, join me around the campfire as I read from No Sleep. Adam without fear posted The Darkness Smiled, and it goes like this. I was 19 years old when we went into the woods. I had been working at the plant for a little over a year, long enough to get used to the old bastard's jokes and to start busting a few chops of my own. They'd come to like me, appreciate my grunt work, and even start to show me how to do a few things around the factory. So I wasn't too surprised when they asked me to go hunting with them, even though I'd never expressed interest in it before. I said no at first, but the more I thought about it and the more they gave me a hard time, I thought, why not? I'd gotten my hunting license years ago at the urging of my grandfather, but never actually used it. I figured I might as well get my money's worth at some point in my life, and besides, those other guys were fun to hang out with. As a refresher course, I went out with a friend of mine a couple times when deer season opened, and a couple weeks later, on a long weekend, I headed up north with the guys from work to get ourselves some deer. We had a convoy of 4 vehicles heading up the highway. We could have fit in 3, but Dutch insisted on driving himself in his own car. That's Dutch for you, Mackie chuckled as we cruised up the highway. Worked with him for 20-some years, since he was younger than you, kid, and barely had a full conversation. Nice guy, though. And a hell of a worker, Tom added. I nodded from the back seat of Mackie's pickup. The two of them had been shooting the breeze for the whole time. I was more interested in watching out the window as the city melted into the suburbs, which turned into a trickle of little villages, and from there into just an occasional drip of houses. We turned off the highway onto what was still technically State Route 28, but was just a country road to me. Very small. We passed through one more tiny speck of a town, then turned off onto a side road, down a dirt trail that probably wasn't on any map, then cut through some terrain that probably was never a road at all. We pulled up to camp and started to unload stuff while cracking jokes about Dutch's little car barely making it over the road. There were 8 of us in total, 5 from work and 3 friends. One of the friends, Mackie's nephew and co-owner of the property, had already beat us up here and had lunch cooking when we pulled in. We all helped ourselves to some grilled hot dogs, and as we were finishing up, somebody cracked open a beer. "You're not drinking yet, are you?" Tom said. "What's it look like I'm doing? You want one?" "I ain't drinking if I'm handling a gun," Tom said. "You going out today? Thought we were going to wait till morning." "Why not?" Tom said. "We still have 2 hours of daylight left." "Suit yourself. Who else wants a beer?" Almost everyone spoke up. "How about you, kid? You want a beer?" "He ain't old enough to drink, remember?" Tom said. "Besides, he's going out in the woods with me." I looked at Tom and said, "I am?" "That's why you came here, ain't it?" Tom asked. He flashed me a smile that made his mustache bunch up. "I'd like to go as well," Dutch said. "All right, then, let's go." I threw on a thick camouflage coat, some even thicker gloves, took the gloves back off so I could load my gun properly, laughed off the old folks teasing me about the gloves, put my gloves back on, laughed off some more teasing about how the hell I was supposed to shoot with gloves that thick, and followed Tom and Dutch into the woods. The camp was a long, skinny building at the side of a small clearing. The clearing was cut in half by the trail that brought us here from the road. Across the clearing, on the other side of the trail, was a decent-sized storage shed and an outhouse, while the half-dozen trucks and one little car were parked haphazardly around the grass. The trail extended past the end of the clearing and turned into the woods from a curve out of sight. We walked along the trail until it thinned from a road to a footpath. We stopped and stared into the woods for a minute. It was quiet and chilly as we were staring. Most of the trees had been reduced to skeletons this early November weekend, and we had to step carefully as to not crunch the new fallen leaves. "All right," Tom murmured. He spoke softly now. "You know where you're going, Dutch?" "I'm going to try to find my usual spot down in the valley," Dutch said, matching Tom's tone. "If that's okay." "Have at it," Tom said. "I'm taking the kid up the hill." Dutch broke off to the right and snaked into the trees. Tom led me to the left and deeper into the woods. It didn't take long for us to come up to the bottom of a steep hill. The grade shot upward so abruptly that it was more like a wall of earth than a hill. We walked along the bottom for a while until the trees thinned out enough for me to make out a path heading to the top. "All right, kid," Tom said. He was whispering now. Each word came out with a small puff of mist. I've been coming here with Mackie since I was your age, and he was mine. And I can say that the top of this hill is the best hunting spot on the property. And best of all, none of those other bastards know about it, 'cause they're all too old or too fat to climb the hill, or both. So it's our little secret. Now, there's a lot of deer up here, so we're going to split. Walk down here another 50 yards, and then we'll meet up at the same time. Is there another trail down here? I asked. Nope. Then why don't you go down there and let me follow the trail up? I'm too old and too fat, he said with a chuckle. That's for sure. Piss off. He gave me one of those buddy punches on the shoulder. Watch your step going up and keep your eyes peeled. How can I watch my step and watch for deer at the same time? You'll figure it out, smartass. I walked a few steps down when he called after me. Remember, he said, if something runs between us, don't shoot me. I rolled my eyes and walked on. I traced the hill until about where he told me to go and started to climb. True to word, there was no path going up. I could walk for a little way, keeping my balance by leaning forward and carefully stepping over the logs and rocks. After a short distance, the grade got too steep and I had to start pulling myself up. About halfway up, I grabbed a sapling and it snapped in my hand. I skidded a foot or two backward with my boots dragging through the leaves. It jogged my gun strap from its position. The rifle swung loose, the barrel clacking against the rock. I winced at the thought of an accidental trigger bump, then steadied myself and pulled the gun back into place. A few feet up was a massive tree. It was higher than even the trees at the top of the hill. Its trunk was as thick as a small car. It stretched above me like a wooden skyscraper. The earth below it had been eroded, exposing a mangled coif of roots, almost as long as I was tall. It looked like a pretty good ladder, so I reared back and sprang upward like an insect. I made it close to my target, but not quite, and planted my face into the dirt with a thud. Tom bellowed from deeper in the woods. For Pete's sake, kid, quit making me laugh. You're spoiling the hunting. I gave him the finger without looking in his direction, then picked myself up again. At that moment, a small object in the leaves caught my attention. I thought at first it was a spent bullet casing, or maybe a discarded flashlight battery. I unburied it from the foliage and found it to be neither. It was a stone cylinder, about 2 inches long and half an inch in diameter. The ends were flat and smooth, while the circumference was covered with grooves. I held it up, turning it over in my hand, and quickly realized that the grooves made a shape. This tiny piece was stone and had been expertly carved into the shape of a crude humanoid with a garish, angry face, similar to a Hawaiian tiki statue. Kid, you okay? Tom's voice snapped me out of it. I gave him thumbs up, stuffed the little sculpture in my back pocket, and reached for the roots hanging under the tree. No sooner had I pulled myself up, then came the second big surprise of the evening. Now that I was eye level with it, I could tell that the space under the tree was hollow. There was a deep black pit extending at least 2 feet into the hole in the side of the hill. The roots dangled in front of it like a curtain. I couldn't tell how deep it was exactly, as it gave way to inky blackness after only a couple inches. It was too small for me to fit in, but a smaller man could maybe crawl on his hands and knees, and a child could walk right through it. I considered sticking my hand inside, then thought better of it. After all, a cave like this was prime real estate for a mother fox. I decided not to think about it too much and finished my journey to the top of the hill. Tom met me, and we started our hunting for the night. He set me up at the intersection of the walking trail and the deer runway. Cold air made it hard to sit still. Mackie and his nephew were talking about the snow coming soon. It got even worse in their wilderness than back home downstate. I scanned the woods for any kind of movement, then clapped my hands over my mouth to stifle a yawn. This wasn't good for hunting. You had to be as still and quiet as possible. How could I not yawn, though? I was tired. It was cold, and I had almost no sleep over the last 24 hours. The nap I'd taken earlier felt so good. The woods here were quiet. Maybe I could stave off those yawns if I just closed my eyes for maybe 15 minutes. When I woke up, the giant full moon was peeking at me through the treetops. My first thought was shock and almost a little bit of panic. I didn't mean to sleep so long. I wondered if the other guys were looking for me. The moon wasn't very high yet, so maybe it had only just gotten dark. I hopped up from my spot and started hiking back toward camp. Fortunately, the moonlight was bright enough to let me see where I was going without a flashlight. I paused when I got close to that tree. It towered over everything around it like a giant wooden cathedral. The stone figurine was still in my pocket, and I started fingering it without thinking. Such an odd thing, even without the creepy stories. Then there were those eyes, if even they were eyes, just glowing white discs at the back of that cave. They had to be eyes, unless my own were just playing tricks on me. Climbing down was probably not a good idea. It was late and the other guys would be worried. On the other hand, it would only take a minute, and the curiosity was killing me. If only I could look into that cavern one more time and see what was really in there. I slung my rifle over my shoulder and started to climb down. I leaned against the saplings to keep my balance until it was too steep and I had to face the dirt and had to inch down like a ladder. After a few minutes of working through the obstacles, I made it to the lock of coiled roots suspended under the trunk. I moved a few aside and peered into the hole. Nothing. The space beneath the tree was filled with darkness, as empty as the old man's stories. I started to laugh at myself. I really was just a goofy kid jumping at phantoms. I let the roots fall and was just about to start climbing again when something caught my eye. I moved them aside again and peeked in. This time the orbs were there, the same wide, glowing ovals that I'd seen in the same place before. As soon as I looked in, 2 more sets appeared further in the cave on either side. Wow! So there really was something in here after all. At least I'd confirmed it. A few more white dots blinked on farther back. I started to get a little nervous in the pit of my stomach. If these were bear cubs, their mom couldn't be too far. Then it smiled. The darkness below the closest set of eyes peeled back, revealing a huge crescent of teeth. The mouth stretched almost as wide as the eyes and dipped deeply enough for the whole image to look like an umlaut over a U. The teeth looked like daggers, long and sharp like the mouth of a shark, but gnarled and twisted in different directions. They seemed to glow on their own. As no light reached that deep into the cave, the whole face hung in the air like a deranged Cheshire cat. Adrenaline has never surged so fast and hard as it did in that moment. It erupted and set my insides on fire, with a cold sweat oozing down my skin. The stories and stone figures didn't even cross my mind. All I could do was to swear under my breath. They leered at me. 1,000 hours seemed to pass in just a few seconds, and after what happened next, I wished for 1,000 more. The face lunged at me. I saw a cloud of gnashing knives fly down the tunnel. On instinct, I sprang away from the opening, throwing myself with no particular plan on where to go. Gravity made that decision for me. I went ass over tea kettle and tumbled down the hill. The whole way down felt like getting pummeled by a boxer as my body bounced off rocks and branches. Everything whooshed and whirled around me until I gave up on telling ground from air. At one point in my fall, I noticed my rifle sling slipping off my shoulder, and an instant later it had vanished completely. I rolled all the way down to the bottom of the hill and kept going on momentum until colliding with a fallen tree trunk and wrapping myself around in a knot. For the first second, I laid there dazed. In the second, I noticed a million aches and pains. At the third, a stick snapped as something, the things, made a beeline for me through a flurry of leaves. I jumped to my feet and almost went right back down. As I tried to hop over the log, I grabbed a nearby branch to steady my weight, wobbled around the obstacle, and limped into the woods. My whole body ached. It felt like somebody had buried a hatchet in my leg. Everything was still spinning from my tumble down the hill, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't even think. I just had to move. I hobbled like a drunk man. I was almost blind from sensory overload. Behind me, the creatures screeched. Their cries had the cadence of a chipmunk or bird with a tone like a broken speaker on a malfunctioning robot. The sound wrenched my guts, and I tried to pick up the pace. The forest became a mishmash of abstract existence. I ran. They chased me with an orchestra of rustling leaves and their hellish screams. I had no idea where I was anymore. Everything was such a blur that I couldn't have been miles away or only feet from the log. I didn't care or dare to look back. I just had to keep moving, moving, running, hobbling, aching, screeching, those eyes, those teeth. The pain in my leg got worse with each step. Every time I moved, a bolt of angry lightning shot from the middle of my foot up to my hip. It hurt so much, too much. My legs couldn't hold me anymore. I tried to take another step and went down. I landed half-cocked on my shoulder and rolled onto my back. The creatures slowed down and stopped their war cries. There was no point in trying to get back up and run. I had nothing left in me to give. The chase was over, and I was at their mercy. Those giant glowing eyes bounced a little as they walked up to me. I could almost see their outlines in the moonlight. One of them stepped over my torso and leaned closer to my face. It peeled back its lips into that same sickening smile from under the tree. Dear God, it was going to eat me, right then and there. Its mouth was bigger than my entire head, which it could have bitten right off if it wanted to. Its rows of teeth were haggard and gnarled, pointing every which way. I could imagine them ripping and tearing at flesh as it chewed me. I don't know if I'd been screaming the whole time or not, but when it opened its jaws, I howled. The creature smiled wider at that point. A couple of the other ones did the same. "Hey," somebody's voice rang out from somewhere off to my right. "Hey, kid, is that you?" The creature backed off, its smile turned down, and its massive white eyes seemed to dart toward the sound. This was my only chance. "Here," the word burst out of me in desperation. If there was any energy left in my body at all, it forced its way out in the most horrified scream that a person could muster. I felt like I was yelling a hurricane into existence. "Here, I'm over here, here." A flashlight beam washed over us, and I saw them. They looked like the stone figurine I had found, but only in the same way that a cartoon drawing of a human looks like us. They were short and thick, with rough, blemished skin that looked like their entire bodies were made from calluses hung on a frame. They had all the human features, but every one of them was wrong. Appendages were too long or too short or slightly off from where they should be. Their heads were squarish looking, as big as a normal person's midriff, with eyes like footballs and mouths like sharks. The whole group of them spun to face the source of the light. The one closest to me looked shocked, an expression all too human for such an abomination to have. They all looked shocked. They froze and stared. A few yards away, whichever one of the guys had found us sputtered a string of swear words a mile long. One of the creatures opened its mouth and let out a terrible cry. It only lasted for a second before being drowned out by the explosion of gunfire. They scattered. The whole group of them darted back the way they came in a flurry of loose leaves. The light quivered a little, and a moment later the rifle reported another shot. One of the creatures cried out in the distance. A moment later, they were quiet. Dutch jogged over and kneeled down next to me. "Kid, I didn't even know. Are you okay?" I wanted to sob, but I was too tired. Instead, I craned my neck to look at the moon, now cresting the treetops. It was pretty that night. Half an hour later, I was laying in a bed in camp with a warm cloth on my forehead. One of the other guys, who I did not know, was a volunteer firefighter. After he deemed me capable of walking, he and Tom helped me back to the cabin. They helped me take off my outer layer, gave me a glass of water, and helped me into the bed while the firefighter guy examined my bumps and bruises. "So what happened exactly?" Tom said. Dutch and I locked eyes. I shook my head and took a sip of water. "He got attacked by some kind of animal, I guess. I couldn't tell exactly what they were, but they had big eyes. Bear cubs, maybe?" "Nah, a cub won't go after a person," Mackie said. "Coyotes, probably." "I don't know. I didn't see them very well," Dutch said. "Probably, yeah, coyotes, I guess." Mackie looked at me. "Why didn't you shoot at him, kid?" "I lost my gun while I was rolling down the hill." I croaked. My voice came out way more hoarse than I expected. Tom's face dropped like he had seen a ghost. "Is that what happened? Them coyotes came up on you, you fell down the hill and dropped your gun on the way down, and then they chased you even more? I nodded. That was basically what happened, except for the coyotes being, well, something else. Sorry, kid, Tom shook his head. Maybe we should take him to a hospital. Nearest hospital's all the way up in Boonville, I think, Mackie said. Might be one in Old Forge, but I don't know. I looked up at him. Home. What, kid? I just want to go home. Tom put his hand on my shoulder. That's fair, kid. Just rest up for the night and first thing in the morning. Well, I'll take him right now, Dutch said. Everybody turned to see that he was already half packed anyway. I nodded, sipped my water, and said, yeah. Well, he finished getting ready. A couple of the other guys packed my stuff for me. Tom promised to find my rifle in the morning. 15 minutes later, the whole cabin helped me out to Dutch's car. They told me goodbye, and we were off. Less than a half hour had passed since the darkness smiled at me, and we were on the road, headed home. Dutch floored it to get out of there. We bounced around like pinballs as the little car drove over a trail that it had no business driving on. I didn't care. It was nothing compared to my adventure down that hill. We turned onto a side road, then pavement, drove past the Forestport sign and the little store, and turned onto that tiny country road, masquerading as a major route. As soon as that route hit New York State Route 12, Dutch floored the gas and didn't let up until we passed Utica. We sat in silence for a long time until he pulled over beside a farmer's field somewhere this side of the city. Kid, I sat up in my seat, having been dozing off. We both know those weren't coyotes out there, Dutch said. He turned his head to look at me. In the glow of the dashboard, I could see tears running down his cheeks. What the hell were they? I rested my forehead against the window and looked up at the moon. Now, at its full zenith, I don't know. That was a lie, I knew, but I couldn't bring myself to say it. I took a couple extra days off from work to sit around and do nothing. When I finally went back, it was hard. Tom returned the rifle and apologized. I think he may have felt a little responsible for my spill down the hill, being the one who told me to go up there in the first place. The other guys noticed and were sympathetic at first, but when I was still depressed for a few days later, they started in with ball breaking again. Just being around them brought me back to that night, so a couple weeks later I put in my notice and moved on. I got a job at a gas station in the middle of the city. It paid a fraction of what the plant did, but it was enough to afford an apartment in an area as far removed from any woods as possible. Sometime later I ran into Tom as he came to fill up at my place. He gave me the unfortunate news that Dutch had left the plant soon after I did, and a few months later hanged himself. It hurt to hear that. He had always been so quiet that I wonder if he didn't have some depression issues beforehand. But deep down inside, I had to wonder if those horrible faces he'd seen that night might have haunted him way too much. This whole episode happened years ago. I'm married now with 2 children. We have lived the lives of city slickers, thanks in no small part to my effort. I couldn't stay away from the woods forever, though. Recently, my wife insisted on taking the kids to some fairy tale themed water park upstate. I didn't want to. She put her foot down, so we piled the family in the car and cruised up State Route 12 until it turned into the dinky country road called State Route 28. I started to shake the further we got from civilization and almost threw up as we drove through the village of Forestport. But I pressed on in silence. Our destination wasn't very far away. I tried to make the most of that amusement park. My wife noticed that something was wrong. I choked up and started feeling sick. I let her know I just wasn't feeling well, which was the perfect excuse to get out of an evening's festivities. They went to walk the town, and as soon as they were gone, I jumped up in the car and took off. First stop was the liquor store. Then I cruised a few minutes out of town until I was surrounded by forest. I pulled over and stood at the edge of the woods. It was a huge, dark, and easy place for secrets. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a secret of my own that I'd smuggled along, a stone figurine carved like an Indian totem pole. I pulled my arm back and pitched it as hard as I could into the forest. I never heard it land. I got in the car, drove back to the hotel, poured myself a glass of whiskey, and tried to forget about the draw boys. Well, guys, that was the story. I hope that you enjoyed it. And again, thanks for listening.